All right. So today we're diving into something a little different. We're
Yeah.
going to be looking at the impact of comparing children.
Okay.
And, this is something that I think we all we hear about it. We know it's probably not a good thing, but like,
Right.
what's the real deal here? And you sent over some fascinating research on this. And I have to say, I'm kind of nervous to see what we uncover.
Yeah, I think that it's something that most people don't really think about until they have kids or maybe they have nieces and nephews and they start to see kind of like, the differences in the way that kids develop. And I think it's something that we all can relate to because I'm sure we've all been compared to a sibling or someone else in
Yeah.
our lives.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. Like, it's funny because even just thinking about this episode, like, I immediately went back to like, oh, well, my brother was always like the athlete. And I was like, the more, I don't know, whatever,
Right.
like, just those things that get put on you, even if it's not like a bad thing.
Right.
It's just like, that's just how we kind of identify ourselves.
It's part of how you develop your identity. And I think that's, part of what makes this research so interesting is that because it can have such a profound impact on how kids develop.
Okay. So I think the first thing that really jumped out to me from what you sent over was how like the experts are just very much so against it.
Yeah.
It's not even like, oh, like maybe do this.
Yeah, there's not really any gray area, right? It's like, just don't do it.
It's just a big no-no. So like, particularly when it comes to like academic achievements, but I'm sure this like spans across, everything. But like, why? Why is it such a hard no?
Well, I think the research, I mean, it goes in a couple of different directions, but I think a lot of it centers on this idea that comparison can really damage a child's self-esteem and that it can create a lot of stress and anxiety in their lives. Because if they're constantly being measured against someone else, whether it's a sibling or a classmate or a friend, it's really hard for them to develop a sense of self-worth,
Yeah.
because they're always feeling like they have to measure up.
Yeah, that makes me think about like I have a friend who's like going through this with like her kids and their after school activities.
Right.
It's like one's really good at, sports and the other one's like really into art. And she's like constantly, even though it's not like intended to be mean, it's just like, how do you, navigate that?
And that's the thing is that, like, most parents don't even realize they're doing it, right?
Yeah.
It's not like they're intentionally trying to hurt their kids. It's just, it's so ingrained in us to compare, to measure, to see who's ahead, who's behind.
Right.
But the research is showing that it can have these really negative consequences.
Yeah. So then, like, what are some of the things that you mentioned? Self-esteem. We talked about like anxiety, stress. Like, what are other ways that this can like manifest, I guess?
Yeah. So, I mean, another big one is, kids might start to withdraw from social situations. So because they're afraid of being judged or, found not good enough, they might start to avoid, play dates or birthday parties or even just like interacting with other kids at school
Wow.
because they're so worried about being compared.
It's like they're already like kind of assuming that that's what's going to happen.
Right. Exactly. They're anticipating that comparison.
Wow. And so it really does become like a much bigger thing than just kind of like those throwaway comments that, we all probably experienced, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And this is where it gets really interesting is, when we start to look at like the brain science behind it, because there have been studies that show that, when children are constantly compared, it actually activates their amygdala, which is the fear center of the brain.
Wow, that's kind of scary.
It is kind of scary, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like their brain is interpreting these comparisons as a real threat.
Wow. That's incredible. And, it makes you wonder too, like how much of this is like, tied to this idea of like a fixed mindset versus like a growth mindset, which I know like, we talk a lot about in like education and just like, personal development and stuff. But like, I feel like this is where that really comes into play because it's like, are we telling these kids that they're like stuck or are we telling them that they can like grow?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important point because when kids are constantly being compared, it can lead them to develop what's called a fixed mindset, which is basically this belief that their intelligence is like fixed, right? Like they're born with a certain amount and that's it. And so they might start to think like, well, why bother trying, right? If I'm not good at math, I'm just never going to be good at math.
Right. You're just always going to be like less than in that way than someone else.
Exactly. And that's incredibly damaging to their motivation because if they don't believe that they can improve, then why try?
Okay. So then this is like the big question. What do we do? How do we like not fall into this trap? Because I know that, like you said, a lot of parents, it's not even intentional.
Right.
So like, what are some things that we can do like practically to kind of like combat this, I guess?
Yeah, well, I think one of the most important things is to shift our focus. So instead of, constantly comparing our kids to other kids or even just like, their past selves, it's really important to focus on their individual progress, their individual strengths.
So like really honing in on that individual rather than like the big picture of like everyone.
Exactly. So, maybe your child is really struggling in math, but they're, an amazing artist.
Okay.
Celebrate that. Help them to see that their value doesn't lie in, being good at everything.
It's about recognizing their unique journey and not comparing it to someone else's.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important point, too, is that, every child develops at their own pace.
Right.
They have their own strengths, their own weaknesses, and that's okay.
So then would you say, like, instead of like asking, those questions, like, at the dinner table, like, oh, who got the better grade?
Yeah.
Like, what are some things that we could be asking?
Yeah, I love that. Instead of asking, who got the better grade, try asking things like, what did you learn today? What was challenging for you? How did you overcome that challenge?
Oh, I love that.
Or what are you most proud of?
Oh, that's so good.
Questions that really focus on the process of learning, the effort that they're putting in, and the progress that they're making.
Okay. So it's about really like instilling in them that like growth mindset, that like effort, that process is what matters. And like celebrating that and focusing on that rather than like the end result.
Exactly. Because when we focus on those things, it helps kids to develop that growth mindset, which is the belief that their abilities can grow and improve with effort and learning.
Oh, I love that. So it's not just about protecting them from like the negative, but it's like actively
Yeah.
like pushing them towards that like positive, like you can do it.
Exactly. It's about empowering them to be lifelong learners.
Wow, this has been such a good like kind of like mind shift for me because I think, again, even going back to like preparing for this, it's like I didn't realize how much I've probably internalized some of this stuff. And so I know like as I move forward in my life and like, with my nieces and nephews and, if I have kids one day, like it's definitely something I'm going to like be so much more mindful of.
Yeah, and I think it's a journey for all of us, right? It's about unlearning some of those kind of ingrained habits that we have and really being mindful of the language that we're using and the messages that we're sending to the kids in our lives.
Wow. Food for thought, listeners. Keep those deep dives coming and
Yeah.
we'll chat soon.
Sounds great.
Bye.